Hello and welcome to Kira Una's DIY, coming to you from the great city and vault of Ronto. Please note that the Fallout games are based in an alternate reality and that the games themselves are rated for 17 years of age or older, rated M for mature. In this video, we may be discussing various commentary about world wars, post-apocalyptia, and potential mention of zombies. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi there, this is Editing Kira here, coming to you to advise you that if you haven't seen the first half, you may want to go and check that out, and the link to the video will be in the description box down below. Now, despite the background noise, let's get back to the vault and the vault suit. Okay, so I have this sort of gold buttery yellow. It's probably a little lighter than what I planned. This is supposed to be 100% cotton, but it feels lighter than that. And I'm kind of wondering about the opacity and how well this will show up against the blue. So I'm gonna grab the blue right now and test this as a single layer. If not, I might have to double it up. And this is the blue that I'm using. Get a better look at the color. And this is just a plain cotton. It is labeled as ocean. It would be better if I doubled it up, and that would also give me a better facing. I don't want to double it up. Front yoke facings probably need a reinforcement, so I might have to do that twice. I can live with that though. The facings will go better with the buttons because it'll secure them. And I did finish putting the glow-in-the-dark vinyl onto all of these buttons. I did do a soak test with a spare button, and it lasted in the water for at least 10 minutes without it budging at all, so I'm kind of hoping it will hold up to a wash. If it doesn't, I can still live with that. Now, in classic Fallout form and function, because I didn't have any half-inch buttons to match with the front, I thought the white ones would be a little bit too obvious on the side pockets for the, or the side seams for the butt. So I went and looked through my button collection, because almost every sewist has extra spare buttons. And I managed to, I scavenged these buttons from old clothing, so this is very appropriate for this project. All of these are approximately the same size as the shank buttons that I made glow in the dark. So I scavenged all of these, and this should work. I might even pick out a couple of blue ones just to sort of semi-match the fabric. It's not going to be perfect, but you know what? I'm sticking with the no metal section of this sort of build. So I have buttons, I have the fabric. We'll see about doubling this up, and I'll probably flatline it and then throw it through the serger somehow. I'll have to back face it possibly for the numbers, which I'll do with I'll do that with an interfacing. I will do a burn test on this at some point, primarily because this doesn't feel like cotton. This feels like a poly cotton to me. I will live with the fact that if it is a poly cotton, it'll be fine. So that's okay. And I also have to trim off the bolt, the printer's mark, so all this is gonna get cut off and go. And keep in mind I still have to wash this buttery yellow fabric, so I think I will do that now, but I'm gonna do this first. Let's cut that off, because this will be very satisfying. There we go. And now I just have some scrap. Alright, so another thing that I forgot to discuss is this. This is the vault number. This also happens to be the Toronto area codes. And this is going to be done in yellow with some white as the backing so that it pops from the blue. And then I'm going to probably do just a satin stitch all the way around the numbers. This is going to be my template and to help me position it. So I'm going to cut this out very, very carefully and then use this bounding box as my placement, so that way I can trace it out, figure out where it goes, and then I'll probably, because there are types of glues that are like water soluble, but I'm okay if it bleeds or goos a little bit. One of the ones as a quilting trick that people use is they use just a good old fashioned glue stick, the type that you give to preschoolers. So one like this. So I'm probably going to use this in between the layers of the fabric just so that it sticks down, dries, and it doesn't go anywhere because it will wash out eventually. And this is something that quilters use when they're doing applique sometimes. I have seen this as a trick. You can use this method if you choose to, but you don't have to. And for anybody who is wondering, this is the official vault font, and it's called Monophoto. Monophoto. So if you are ever doing any vault stuff, you know what to look for your font reference. All right. So while stuff is washing, let me get into ironing this fabric, and we will cut to me cutting out and starting the sewing. Okay, I did take a moment to do a burn test. And I can confirm it's cotton. It's just kind of a thin cotton. But yeah, there's no beading for plastics. It turned ashy. It took me a little bit to blow it out. And it smells like, burning paper. So it's cotton. I'm going to get rid of this sample because I don't need it. And get into the ironing. I just wanted to make a note here that puzzle pad piece that is on the floor there is specifically for my knees, so I don't wear my knees out because I do not have a cutting table, and that there is no glamour in being a floor troll.
The next day.
Here's where we'll take the time to cut out the vault suit numbers, being very careful to stay within the lines to have a really nice clean template. The next step, we're going to take our fusible woven interfacing, iron it to the yellow piece of fabric, and use our template to cut out the numbers for the vault. When you're placing your numbers onto the interfacing side to trace out, you're going to want to make sure that your numbers are flipped upside down, and we're going to trace it with a pencil. This way, when we go to cut it out, it will be facing right side up. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of pieces that need interfacing. Partially because it needs a little bit of stiffness and reinforcement for things like buttons. The other part is essentially to cause like a little bit more contrast between the blue and the yellow fabric because the yellow is a little see-through. So we have the cuff sleeves, and any part that says no seam allowance, essentially it's going to be sewn all the way across with sort of a decorative top stitching. I don't have a cover stitch machine or an embroidery machine, so I'm going to use my zigzag at a very small amount. I'm gonna do a couple of test strips just to make it work, and then I'm gonna sew that essentially across. I'm gonna sew sort of like a satin stitch. Yeah, that's the word. Satin stitch across the top there. And anything with no seam allowance, that's where the satin stitching is going to go. So we have the cuffs, we have the front button facing placket, the belt. Now because the fabric wasn't wide enough to accommodate for the length of the belt that I needed, from here to here is going to be buttons. So essentially I have to make sure at least one of these layers from here to here is actually done with interfacing. The front of the waist, I feel like this should get some interfacing to give it a little bit of structure, as well as that contrast again, just to make it so that it's not a see-through. Plus we also have a button placket at the front fold placket, so this will be going on the left side, and then two of these pieces are going to be sewn together. One of them has to be interfaced, and then it will be the overlay for the buttons to fold over the other half. Then we have the yoke pieces. Now because this is a neck piece and we don't want it, because this is a yoke piece and this is going to go around the neckline, we want the neckline to have minimal stretch if at all possible. So that's where this is going to come in. So this whole thing has to be interfaced, because not only that, but we're also going to be doing some satin stitching all the way around this edge as well. Then we have the front waistband placket, which is the part that goes inside at the waistband on both sides. So then that way it's A, yellow, and B. It has a bit of reinforcement for that center waistband button. So there's that. And then we have the back seam, which is also going to take weight because the buttons themselves are going to sit like here, here, and here. So, and this is also going to be contrasting, and because there's no seam allowance, all of this is going to be satin stitched. So we have all of that. So I have, luckily, hopefully enough interfacing to work with. Yes, this is Pellon interfacing, as you can see by this crinkly piece of paper that identifies what the fabric is. I have a fair bit of it, and I have more coming because I could probably use it for other projects. So this is what I'll be using for this project specifically. I'm not going to show you me ironing all this together because it'll take forever. I'll probably wind up doing that later and then having to sew, start serging all of the edges. Most of you will not have a serger at home, so for anybody who doesn't have a serger, I would suggest using a zigzag stitch or the overlock stitch that's on your machine. I will put it somewhere in the screen here from my own machine, just as a point of reference. With that said, I have a lot of work to do, so I will get into that and I will show you me starting to put it all together once I have everything done.
One eternity later.
So this is my serger. It is the Singer Heavy Duty, that one. So I'm gonna serge all of the edges. When I get to the blue, I'm gonna switch out the thread to something darker. I think I have something darker. I'll have to double check. Pretty sure I have something darker. And I'm using the pattern pieces as essentially a marker, so I know what piece it is for when I go to assemble it. But because I have to serge everything first, here we are. So let's get this done. I'm trying to make it my darndest not to cut anything off because I need the seam allowance. Now, for those of you who aren't used to using a serger, if you screw up, don't take the fabric and try and yank it out of there, because all of the threads will keep it in there. So when you get to the end of your seam or your stitch or whatever it is that you're doing and you're trying to remove it from the machine, don't ever yank it, because this is the most popular mistake that a lot of people do, and you run the risk of breaking your needle, you run the risk of breaking your machine. Your best bet is to just finish the seam and then keep going till you have a long enough tail and then cut it off. that's not going to go anywhere. This piece won't go anywhere, and then you can start again. Yes, you will have tails that you have to cut off. The alternative is you can tuck the tails in, depending on how much you have, because see, I've got a tail here. But you can always take one of those super skinny crochet hooks, and I'll put it somewhere on the screen. But all of this is going to be on the inside, so it won't really matter that much if I just cut it off. When you're using your machine, honestly, there is nothing to be afraid of so long as you can sew in a straight line and as long as you keep your seam before that cut line. So there is a marker here on the machine. I can't really show you it right now, but I will try and take a photo of it here somewhere so you can see, and put it on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. The whole point is to keep your seam lined up, so then that way the knife won't cut it. However, if you do mess up, you don't want to yank anything out of the machine like you would with a regular home sewing machine, because you could run the risk of breaking your needle, breaking the threads, breaking the machine in general, and it will not come out that easy. So the whole point is when you get to the end of the seam, make more tails and then cut it off. So I'm gonna be at this for a little while, so go grab your beverage of choice, take it easy, and I will see you back in like a few hours.
Much later.
We need to color match our fabric to our thread, and for some decorative stitching I think we'll use some of this glow-in-the-dark thread, because what's a vault suit without some radioactivity? I also need to get my needles set up. I have a color coding system for what kind of needles are for which, and the writing on the needle itself is hard to read, so sometimes I forget what kind of needle is in my machine. To avoid this, I use a permanent marker and put it on the top of the needle where it won't get on the fabric. I use red for wovens and greens for stretch fabrics. So as this is a woven fabric, I will use this red permanent marker. Next we're going to sew the bulk of the pants, sewing the darts first, but we'll have to stop as we have some decorative elements that we'll have to sew on, as well as all the button plackets and the front fly facings and placket. Before we get too far ahead, we'll tack down the vault number to the back of the shirt so we have less of a struggle sewing it down before the rest of the shirt portion is assembled. This is to avoid a bunch of fiddly satin stitch top stitching later. To do the satin stitch, I selected this machine embroidery thread, which also doubles down pretty nicely as regular sewing thread. I set my machine to a really tight zigzag stitch. I centered the presser foot as best as I could so both the yellow and blue got even stitching, and sewed it in place. I had also added this satin stitching to the cuffs, the yoke around the neck and down the center front, and on the pants portion of the butt flap. I had attached some ties that button up the sleeves up and out of the way so that I don't have to worry about the sleeves falling down if it's hot.
Now, one of the things that my pattern directing teacher actually gave us, which is a bit of a, from what I understand, a bit of a trick of the trade, is she said that if you keep the longest seam, because sometimes the seams don't always match up, and one is sometimes slightly longer than the other in terms of the pieces. If you put the longer piece at the bottom, it will even out as it feeds through the feed dogs because of how it feeds through, so that just slightly a little bit of the longer seam will eventually match up and be a little bit more pairing up with the seam that's on the top.
And I sewed the sleeves and the side seams of the shirt portion into place. I had sewn the button front placket with the two pieces together and pressed it into place so that the underside will just get top stitched down, with running a seam by sewing in the ditch on the top of the outward facing of the shirt portion of the suit. I also sewed a yoke facing and turned it under. This will be top stitched all of that down with glow-in-the-dark thread as a finishing stitch later. I had sewn the button facings for the butt flap in a similar manner. These would be done up along the sides of the hips so that you can lower the butt portion of the pants to use the washroom without having to take the whole suit off. I also added some patch pockets onto the front of the pant legs. Then I added the belt to the back side of the shirt to tie around the front, as well as the waistband around the front that stops at the hips so that it doesn't interfere with the butt flap button plackets. I do realize I'm glazing over a few fine details here, but I honestly don't want this video being 2 hours long. Once the button facings were all in place and the waistbands attached, I marked all my buttons. Struggled a bit with the modern buttonhole function on my machine and cut the buttonholes open. Marked all the buttons. Sewed on all the buttons. Hemmed the pants. And now that all of that is done, the vault suit is completed and on to the cinematic reveal. War. War never changes. In the year 1945, the world witnessed the end of World War II and the beginning of the atomic age, with bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Other wars over time had taken its place. Vietnam, Korea, Colombia, Middle East, Ukraine, and Palestine. Those who instigated those wars were fighting for political power or natural resources. While the world awaited nuclear Armageddon, instead, the world used nuclear energy as a limitless energy supply. People enjoyed the luxuries once thought of the realm of science fiction: domestic robots, fusion-powered cars, portable computers. But then in the 21st century, people awoke from what was known as the American dream. In the 21st century, war was still waged over resources that could only be acquired. Only this time, the spoils of war were also its weapons: petroleum, uranium, and lithium. For those resources, China would invade Alaska, Russia would invade Ukraine, the US would annex Canada, and the European Commonwealth would dissolve into quarreling, bickering nation-states bent on controlling the last of the remaining resources on Earth. With the annexation of Canada by the US, and once the fighting had settled, a corporation known as Vault-Tec would seize opportunity to install one of their vaults in the most populated Canadian city of Toronto. Years of consumption led to shortages of every major resource, The entire world unraveled. Peace became a distant memory. Then, the bombs fell. No one really knows who struck first. Vault 416 is where we begin our story, with the seamstress who took shelter in the vault to make clothes for its residents and for their continued survival.
A little different than all the rest. I'm quite old-fashioned where I had sometimes played chess. And when I'm out, I'm looking for that vintage fling. But all complexions that I adore, so hard to find, these seem impossible to score. So I dream on to someday find that vintage love. I kept on looking, but everyone's such a bore. And out of a sudden, you came through the door. At the next table, your whiskey neat. The lights were dimmed as our eyes met, moves on me. And forevermore, I like to share that vintage dream. I kept on looking, but everyone's such a bore. And out of a sudden, you came through the door.
Thank you once again for joining us on Kira Una's DIY. I really hope that you all enjoyed this little video. If you happen to like what you see, please like, subscribe, pass this video along to friends, and especially if you are a fan of the Fallout universe. Please also note that none of my videos are sponsored or currently monetized, so if you would like to help me out with this channel, please note that I do have a Ko-Fi link in the descriptor box down below. Until next time, bye bye for now, and don't forget to make sure that you take your Rad-X and Rad-Away when you're scavenging in the downtown core. No, Jack, I told you we need better pest control. What, and you think it's my fault that we've got rad roaches eating all the fabric in storage? If you don't do your job, we can't fix the vault suits or any of your armor. No, duct tape is not a fix-all everything solution. Okay, so let me get this straight. You expect me to make you an entire new vault suit and knit you socks? You got the yarn? Do you have the knitting needles? Yes, I know how to do it. But do you have the supplies? Then no, I'm not doing it. Okay, then you owe me $2,000. You owe me 2,000 caps. I'm the only one who's got the skills to be able to sew or knit, and I have a 6-month backlog if I get supplies. Well, then you can go to New York, or you can go to Picker Jack's, or the kitchen. No, not this kitchen, the kitchen. Or maybe the town of Bridge. You know what, it's closer. You could try going to Scar. Yes, you're going to have to go and deal with Mirelurks over at the Bluffs. There's nothing I can really do about that. Do you think I can control whatever crawls out of the lake? Or what used to be the lake?